Atlit Yam is like a missing link in terms of showing us how some groups would have made this transition from strictly hunting-gathering to sedentary agriculture.
The sonar lit up with anomalies that made no sense. They weren't natural. When salvage divers went down to check, they found themselves swimming through the streets of a lost city. This is happening right now off Israel's coast. They've identified houses, mysterious stone circles, and even human graves.
We realized that there in the middle, there are traces of freshwater spring. We found some sediments typical to springs, to fresh water, and we found some plant species also typical to fresh water.
But here's the kicker. This city dates back to around 6900 BC. That's thousands of years before ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia as we know them. This discovery isn't just old, it's forcing a hard reset on history and providing a stunning look at who lived before the world changed. The site that shouldn't exist. The Mediterranean coast off Israel is a graveyard of history. For thousands of years, this stretch of water was the main highway of the ancient world. We're talking about Egyptian grain ships, powerful Roman warships, Phoenician traders, and crusader galleys. They all passed through here, and you better believe many of them met their end in a sudden storm. The seabed is littered with shipwrecks, scattered coins, and pottery jars called amphorae. It's a salvage diver's paradise. So in the mid-1980s, when a team of marine archaeologists led by the now legendary Ehud Galili went exploring near the coast of Atlit, about 10 miles south of the port city of Haifa, they were expecting to find just that. Another wreck, another scattering of ancient cargo. What they found, however, was something that simply should not have been there. It started with a few strange stones. They were too regular, too intentional. One diver signaled to his partner, his light beam cutting through the blue-green water. He fanned away decades of sand and silt to reveal what looked like a paved floor. This wasn't a ship's deck. It was too big, too solid. They followed it. The paved floor led to a wall made of stacked, rough-hewn stones, clearly shaped and placed by human hands. This was no shipwreck. This was architecture. As they expanded their search, the true scale of the discovery hit them like a physical blow. It wasn't just a wall, it was a house, then another house, and another. They weren't exploring a wreck, they were swimming through the abandoned streets of a forgotten village. You see, this is the kind of thing you read about in fantasy novels, not in official dive logs. The team, stunned, immediately reported their findings to the Israel Antiquities Authority. This was something new, something impossibly old. The site was named Atlit Yam for its location off the coast of Atlit. And the first question, the only question that mattered, was when was this place from? The archaeologists began the painstaking process of excavation. They carefully brought up organic samples, scraps of wood, ancient seeds, anything that was once alive and had been miraculously preserved by the low-oxygen, high-salt environment of the seabed. They sent these samples to a lab for radiocarbon dating. To put it mildly, the results broke their brains. When the numbers came back, they had to check them twice, then a third time. The site, Atlit Yam, dated to somewhere between 6900 and 6300 BC. Let's just stop and put that in perspective because that number is hard to even understand. This isn't just old, this is ancient in a way that redefines the word. The Great Pyramid at Giza, the symbol of ancient history, that was built around 2500 BC. This village was already ancient, already lost beneath the waves, for over 4,000 years before the first stone of the pyramids was ever laid. Think about Stonehenge in England. That was built around 3000 BC. Atlit Yam is twice as old. This settlement is older than writing, it's older than pottery. It's from a period called the Pre-Pottery Neolithic, the Late Stone Age. And that is why this discovery is so explosive and why it's changing biblical history. The established timeline, the one taught in every school, says that at this point in history, 9,000 years ago, humans in this region were simple, nomadic hunter-gatherers. They were supposed to be living in crude, temporary huts or caves. They were not supposed to be building permanent, organized villages with stone walls, paved floors, and complex engineering. And they definitely weren't supposed to be doing it in a place that is now under 40 feet of water. The village of Atlit Yam sits between 26 and 40 feet below the surface, and it is massive. It covers a staggering area of over 40,000 square meters. That's nearly 10 acres. 10 acres of a lost world perfectly preserved in a sandy tomb. The thing nobody tells you about underwater archaeology is that the sea is incredible at preservation. On land, wood rots, seeds blow away, and bones turn to dust. But under the sand and silt, away from the oxygen and the elements that decay things, fragile materials can survive for millennia. The divers and archaeologists had stumbled onto the largest and most complete prehistoric settlement ever found underwater. It was a snapshot of a moment in time, just before the sea rose up and swallowed it whole. They had found a ghost town from the Stone Age, and as they began to excavate, they realized this wasn't just a simple fishing village. This was a complex, sophisticated community. They had found the houses, the tools, and even the graves of the people who lived there. But what many overlooked at first was a massive central structure, a deep stone-lined well that would prove to hold the site's most incredible and unsettling secrets. The discovery was a bombshell. It proved that human civilization was far more advanced, far earlier than anyone had ever dared to dream. And for many, it provided the first terrifying physical evidence for the pre-flood civilizations that, until now, were only whispered about in myths and legends. The team knew they had found something world-changing, but they had no idea how much it would change. The houses were just the start. The real secrets were buried beneath the sand. What was hidden in the well? Imagine swimming, not over a coral reef, but through someone's living room. That's exactly what the archaeologists were doing. They began the slow, careful process of mapping the entire 10-acre site. What they found was a level of urban planning that was just shocking for the Stone Age. They charted the foundations of multiple rectangular structures. These were the houses. They weren't flimsy huts, they were sturdy, built with foundations of local sandstone and likely had walls of mud brick and wood that had long since dissolved back into the environment. Inside these homes, they found paved floors and small circular hearths where families cooked their meals and warmed themselves 9,000 years ago. But this was way more than just a cluster of homes. They found evidence of industry. What many overlooked were long, linear walls separate from the houses that seemed to partition different areas of the village. Archaeologists are convinced these were animal pens. That's right. These Stone Age people weren't just hunting, they were farming. They were raising livestock right on the coast. This is one of the earliest examples of animal domestication ever found in the region. Then there were the tools. The sheer number is just wild. In one area alone, one single assemblage, they uncovered over 8,755 flint artifacts. Think about that for a second. This wasn't a place where a few guys chipped rocks. This was a factory. It was a specialized production center. And the tools themselves were not crude, simple choppers. They were specialized, master-crafted implements. They found hundreds of arrowheads for hunting. They found sickle blades. These are sharp, curved flints that were set into wooden handles. This is the smoking gun, hard proof that they were harvesting crops, probably wheat. They found heavy-duty bifaces, which are like Stone Age axes. They found spearheads and beautifully flaked knives. This points to a society with a complex division of labor. You had farmers in the fields, you had herders in the pens, and you had full-time expert craftsmen, flint knappers, sitting for hours day after day creating the exact tools the community needed to survive. And it gets even more amazing. Scientists analyzed the flint itself. It didn't come from the beach. The geological signature matched an outcrop on Mount Carmel over 6 miles away. This means they had trade. They had supply routes. They had designated groups of people who would travel miles, quarry the specific stone they needed, haul it all the way back, and then distribute it to the craftsmen. This is a level of social and economic organization that just shatters the brutish caveman stereotype. But the most mind-blowing discovery, the one that truly cemented this as a place of unbelievable sophistication, was the well. In what seemed to be the center of the village, they found a circular stone structure. At first, they thought it might be another house, but as they began to excavate the sediment from inside it, they just kept digging and digging and digging. The well was dug to a depth of 10.5 meters. That is 34.5 feet deep. Let that sink in. A 9,000-year-old society with no metal tools, no writing, no wheel, dug a hole 34 feet deep. They didn't just dig a hole in the soft sand either. They punched through layers of hard clay and soft sandstone. And then, to keep the whole thing from collapsing in on itself, they lined the entire shaft with stone courses. They built a stone tower in reverse going straight down into the earth. This is an engineering feat that would be impressive in the Bronze Age. In the Stone Age, it's almost unbelievable. It proves, without a doubt, that these people had a deep understanding of their environment, of hydrology, of engineering. They knew exactly where to find the freshwater table, and they had the social cooperation and technical skill to build a permanent, massive structure to get to it. And here's where the story takes a dark, haunting turn. As the archaeologists cleared the tons of marine sediment from the bottom of this massive well, they found more than just waterlogged plants and animal bones. They found human bones, fragments of them. Not just one person, but several. This wasn't a clean, pristine water source by the time it was abandoned. In its final days, it had become a dumping ground, or as some have theorized, something far more sinister. This discovery, the well, completely changed the game. It was a statement. These people weren't just passing through, they were building for the future. They were a permanent, powerful, and deeply intelligent community. But the bones in the well were a clue. They were a sign of the desperation that was to come. The well was an engineering marvel, but it also held a dark secret. The megalithic secret. So who were these people? The artifacts, the houses, and the animal pens give us a crystal clear picture of their life. Archaeologists call it an agro-pastoral marine subsistence. Let's break that down in simple terms. It means they were the ultimate survivors. They had a three-part strategy for success. First, agro for agriculture. The sickle blades and preserved seeds prove it. The land they lived on, now flooded, was once a fertile coastal plain. They were growing crops like wheat. They were, without a doubt, some of the very first farmers on Earth. Second, pastoral. The animal pens. They were raising domesticated animals. This gave them a steady supply of meat, milk, and materials, meaning they didn't have to rely purely on the luck of the hunt. Third, marine. The village was right on the coast, and the bones they found weren't just from goats or cattle, they were from fish. Piles and piles of fish bones. These people were expert fishermen pulling a bounty from the sea. They had it all: farming, ranching, and fishing. They were living in a paradise. They had a varied diet, sturdy homes, and a complex society with craftsmen and engineers. But not all things are what they seem. When scientists analyzed the human remains found at the site, they got a jolt. The bones told a different, much darker story. Near the houses, and in some cases inside them, they found 15 human skeletons. These were proper graves, most were single burials, the bodies laid to rest relatively intact. It showed ritual. It showed they cared for their departed. This was a community, a home. But when scientists examined these skeletons, they found two things. The first was a sign of their difficult life. Many of the skeletons, particularly the adult males, showed severe hypoplasia. This is a fancy term for a defect in tooth enamel. It looks like pits, grooves, or lines in the teeth. What does it mean? It's a permanent marker. It means that as children, these individuals went through a period of extreme stress. Either severe malnutrition, we're talking starvation, or a very, very serious disease. Their bodies had to focus all their energy on just staying alive, and they stopped developing tooth enamel properly. So this paradise was anything but. Life was incredibly hard. They were on the very edge of survival. And there was another discovery, this one even more chilling. On two of those skeletons, a woman and an infant, they found evidence of tuberculosis, TB. This was a bombshell. At the time of its discovery, this was the earliest known case of tuberculosis in human history by 1,000 years. The thing is, many scientists believe that TB was a crowd disease, one that only evolved and spread after humans started living in big, dense, dirty cities. This discovery throws that all out the window. It suggests the disease is far, far older and was already plaguing humanity at the very dawn of civilization. But the houses and the graves weren't the only structures. Near the well, archaeologists found something else. Something that launched 1,000 wild theories. They found a megalithic stone circle. That's right, 7 massive stones weighing up to 1,400 pounds each, arranged in a semicircle. In the center were 2 even larger flat-top stones like an altar. And here's the kicker. The circle was open to the northwest, in the direction of the setting sun during the summer solstice. It was a calendar, a ritual site. It was a Stone Age temple. Now let's connect the dots. You have a stone circle, clearly for ritual. You have a massive well, the lifeblood of the village. And as we mentioned, you have human remains at the bottom of that well. This is where the speculation gets wild. Were these accidental, or was it something else? As their world began to fail, as the water rose, did these people in their desperation turn to ritual? Were the bones in the well the remains of a final, terrible sacrifice to the water gods, an attempt to stop the unstoppable flood that was swallowing their world? We'll never know for sure. But the image of this advanced, yet desperate society gathered at their stone circle, making offerings at the well as the sea encroached, is a haunting one. They were fighting for their very lives. And then, something happened. The thing that strikes archaeologists as so strange is that Atlit Yam appears to be a one-phase settlement. This means it wasn't a place that was built, abandoned, and resettled over and over for centuries. It seems they built it. They lived there for a relatively short period, maybe a few generations. And then, they left. They didn't just pack up and move. The site looks like it was abandoned in a hurry. They left behind thousands of valuable, perfectly good tools. They left their homes. They left their ancestors in their graves. And they left the remains of their departed in the village well. They were running. The question is, what were they running from? It wasn't a monster. It was the planet itself. The Younger Dryas theory. This is where the story of Atlit Yam stops being just archaeology and starts to rewrite our entire understanding of human history. And this is the connection to the biblical narrative that is so stunning and so controversial. Let's look at the dates again. The village was occupied from roughly 6900 BC to 6300 BC. This is not just some random date. This is the tail end of the last ice age. For tens of thousands of years, massive glaciers, miles thick, had covered huge parts of the Earth. But now the planet was warming up, fast, and all that ice, we're talking millions of cubic miles of it, was melting. And all that water had to go somewhere. It went into the oceans. Scientists call this the eustatic rise of the ocean sea levels. For the people of Atlit Yam living on a low-lying coastal plain, it meant only one thing. The sea was rising. This wasn't a gentle, predictable tide. This was a relentless, terrifying encroachment. What many overlooked is that we're not talking about a few inches over a century. In this period, the sea level was rising dramatically. Year after year, the winter storms would get closer. The high tides would flood the lower fields. The salt water would begin to poison their fresh water. Think about their 34-foot deep well. Why build it so deep? They were chasing the freshwater table as the rising sea pushed it further and further down. That well is a monument to their desperation. This is the real terrifying context of this lost city. It's not a city that sank in a single fiery cataclysm like some fantasy. It's a city that was drowned by a changing climate. It was abandoned around 6,300 BC, and the sea simply rose up and swallowed it whole. And this is the biblical history connection. Many people are crazy about finding Noah's Ark on a mountaintop, but what if the story of the Great Flood isn't about a single 40-day event? What if it's a cultural memory? A story passed down through thousands of years about a real time when the entire world changed and the seas rose up to swallow the lands of the ancestors. Atlit Yam is the physical, scientific proof of that story. Here you have a sophisticated, advanced civilization. They have farming, they have complex tools, they have engineering, they have megalithic stone circles. They are the antediluvians, the people who lived before the flood, and they were wiped out. Not by a mythical event, but by a very real, very scientifically verified sea level rise. This discovery is changing biblical history because it suggests the stories in Genesis and other ancient texts, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which also has a great flood, aren't just parables. They are memories. distant, distorted echoes of a real traumatic event that haunted humanity for millennia. The survivors of places like Atlit Yam scattered, moving to higher ground, and they brought their stories with them. Stories of a paradise lost to the water. But here's where the wild theories come in. And to be honest, they are fascinating. Wild theory number 1, the Atlantis connection. Many people are obsessed with Plato's story of Atlantis, a mighty coastal civilization that in a single day and night of misfortune disappeared into the depths of the sea. Plato said this happened 9,000 years before his time, which puts the date around 9,600 BC. That's older than Atlit Yam. But what if Plato, hearing the story thousands of years later, got the date wrong? Or what if Atlit Yam wasn't Atlantis itself, but a colony? A coastal outpost of a much larger lost empire that was based on these now sunken coastal plains? The timelines are eerily similar. A sophisticated civilization, a coastal location, and a flood that wiped it out. Wild theory number 2, the Black Sea deluge. This theory, proposed by scientists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, is terrifying. They believe that for a long time the Black Sea was a small freshwater lake cut off from the rest of the world. But as the Mediterranean rose, the same sea rise that drowned Atlit Yam, the water eventually burst through the Bosphorus Strait. The result wasn't a slow rise. It was a waterfall with the power of 200 Niagara Falls roaring into the Black Sea basin, flooding it in a matter of months. This event happened around 5600 BC. Atlit Yam was abandoned in 6300 BC. Could it be that the abandonment of Atlit Yam was caused by the same Mediterranean instability, maybe a massive earthquake or tsunami that led to the final catastrophic Black Sea flood? It puts Atlit Yam right in the middle of a period of unbelievable geological chaos. Wild theory number 3, the Younger Dryas survivors. This is the big one, championed by researchers like Graham Hancock. This theory says the real cataclysm wasn't the slow melt. It was an event called the Younger Dryas, around 10,900 BC. The theory states that a comet struck the North American ice sheet, causing a catastrophic global flood and a sudden return to Ice Age conditions. This event, they say, wiped out a lost high civilization, the real Atlantis. So where does Atlit Yam fit in? According to this theory, Atlit Yam isn't the start of civilization. It's the end of one. The people of Atlit Yam were the survivors. They were the descendants of this lost super-civilization, clinging to the new coastlines, holding on to ancestral knowledge, like how to build megalithic circles and 34-foot deep wells. This would explain why they were so advanced, so early. It wasn't the dawn of civilization, it was the twilight of one. The textbooks are wrong. We're only seeing what survived on land. Why? This changes everything. So let's just break this down. We have salvage divers who accidentally find a complete Stone Age village under 40 feet of water. It's 9,000 years old, thousands of years older than the pyramids. The people who lived there weren't cavemen. They were sophisticated farmers, engineers, and craftsmen. They built sturdy houses, a 34-foot deep well, and a megalithic stone circle. They also suffered from disease and starvation. And then they were forced to abandon their entire world as the melting ice caps of the last ice age raised the sea level and drowned their city. This is the core of the story, and it's left the world with some massive, troubling questions. People watching this are looking for a mystery, and the mystery is this. If Atlit Yam was so advanced, so much earlier than we thought possible, what else are we missing? For decades, our history books have told a simple, linear story. First came hunter-gatherers, then simple farming, then small villages, and then finally the cradle of civilization in Sumer and Egypt around 3000 BC. Atlit Yam takes that nice, neat timeline and throws it in the trash. It proves that complex, large-scale permanent communities were already thriving 4,000 years earlier. What many overlooked is that Atlit Yam isn't even unique. All around the world, other submerged structures are being found. Off the coast of India in the Gulf of Cambodge, divers found an enormous ancient city 9 miles long under 120 feet of water. Dates from that site came back at around 7500 BC. In the Black Sea, researchers have found perfectly preserved drowned settlements. The thing is, are we missing a key detail? Is it possible that the real cradle of civilization wasn't in the river valleys, but on the coastal plains? Think about it. During the Ice Age, when so much water was locked up in the glaciers, the sea level was over 300 feet lower than it is today. The most fertile, richest, most desirable land on Earth wasn't in the deserts of Egypt or Mesopotamia. It was on these vast, lush coastal plains. That's where humanity would have built its first, greatest cities. And all of that land is now underwater. This discovery didn't happen overnight. The site has been studied for decades, but its implications are just now being fully understood. It suggests that human history is vastly older, more complex, and more tragic than we ever knew. What if our history books are completely wrong? What if they're only telling the story of the survivors, the survivor bias? We've only been excavating the high ground settlements, the places that didn't get drowned. We've been looking for our origins in the wrong place. The real story, the bulk of human history from that era, is underwater. We are, as some have said, a species with amnesia. This isn't a story about a single lost city. It's a story about a lost epic, a whole chapter of the human story that was erased from the map. It survived only in our oldest and most sacred stories, the story of Genesis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the legends of Plato, as a myth of a great flood that wiped out a sinful ancient world. Atlit Yam is the hard physical proof. It's the smoking gun. It's the moment where science and myth collide. It forces us to ask one final controversial question. If the story of a world-ending flood is true, what other myths and legends are actually fragmented memories of a history we've completely and conveniently forgotten? This discovery proves our myths are memories. What other legends are actually real? Let us know below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more secrets from the past.